Glenn Peoples here again, and once more there is a little bit of chaos going on. We are packing. We're probably going to move soon, depending on how things go, hopefully. Nice to see you again. Not that I can. So this short video, and it is relatively short, is a little bit philosophical, maybe a little bit sciencey, although not very. So the universe has a personal cause. And that's because God created the universe and God is personal. Christians believe that. But does the principle of determination that I'll describe shortly demonstrate that the cause of the Big Bang must be personal, as William Lane Craig claims? Or must we rely on other reasons for maintaining that God is personal? I could always be wrong, but I think it's the latter. And I think Dr. Craig got this one wrong. One of the striking things about the Big Bang when it was discovered is that it showed that the universe has a finite past. It came into being. And now on the face of it, that's not particularly challenging if one believes, as most do, that God exists and God brought the universe into existence. But as is no secret, theists, those who believe that God exists, have used the origin of the universe in the finite past as a potent challenge to atheism, since whatever comes into existence has a cause of its doing so. And so with the discovery of the Big Bang, we no longer had to rely solely on philosophical reasoning to show that the universe had to have a finite past. And now there was empirical confirmation. And the discovery of the Big Bang plays a key role in the Kalam cosmological argument as popularized by philosopher William Lane Craig. And for the record, I think it's quite a good argument. Since both space and time came into existence with the Big Bang, the cause of the Big Bang must itself be non-physical, it is not spatial, and timeless, not eternal in the sense that it has always existed over this infinite period of time, since time came into being with the Big Bang, but eternal in the sense of being literally timeless, or atemporal, which is a concept I'm not going to explore much here because it's difficult. Now, according to Bill Craig, sometimes I call him William Lane Craig, sometimes I call him Dr. Craig, but because we both have PhDs, I get to call him Bill. That's my justification. According to Bill Craig, the cause of the Big Bang must also be personal because of the principle of determination. And this is where things can become a little bit unclear for me. I was going to say some people, a lot of people. So it is here that we need to slow down and unpack things carefully. So in the world around us, the world that we observe, the world that we measure and which is subject to the laws of physics, whenever all the necessary and sufficient conditions for a phenomenon exist, then that phenomenon will occur. And a good example is the boiling of water. Take the boiling of water at sea level on Earth. Now, whenever there is pure water at sea level on Earth at least 100 degrees Celsius, that water will boil. If the temperature had been 100 degrees for a century, then the water would have been boiling for a century, assuming, of course, it didn't all get evaporated. Now, assuming that no other conditions had changed, we wouldn't believe someone who said, this water at sea level on Earth has been at least 100 degrees Celsius for days and days, but it just started boiling this minute. That can't be right. that must be untrue. Once the necessary and sufficient, well, I should say, once the sufficient causal conditions exist, then the effect occurs. And there's no decision to be made. This is a mechanistic cause. There's no decision about whether or not the water will boil. When the water is that temperature, it boils, just because of the way physics works here, and chemistry, I suppose, physical properties. The occurrence of the Big Bang, says Dr. Craig, is the same in this regard. Why did that event occur some 13.77 billion years ago? Was it, as some say, the inevitable outcome of the laws of physics? Well, here Craig draws on the Islamic principle of determination, which is an argument made centuries ago by the Muslim philosopher Al-Ghazali, and Craig elaborates. Why did the universe begin to exist when it did, instead of existing from eternity? The answer was carefully explained by Al-Ghazali and enshrined in the Islamic principle of determination. According to that principle, when two different states of affairs are equally possible and one results, this realization of one rather than the other must be the result of the action of a personal agent who freely chooses one rather than the other. Thus, Ghazali argues that while it is true that no mechanical cause existing from eternity could create the universe in time, such a production of a temporal effect from an eternal cause is possible if and only if the cause is a personal agent who wills from eternity to create a temporally finite effect. For while a mechanically operating set of necessary and sufficient conditions would either produce the effect from eternity or not at all, a personal being may freely choose to create at any time, wholly apart from any distinguishing conditions of one moment from another. Notice Craig's use of the phrase "from eternity." In order to make sense in context, this phrase must mean in eternity past, rather than in some timeless state. If a mechanical, that is a non-personal, just like the laws of physics, like the ones we talked about when it comes to water or just the way chemistry works, if a purely mechanistic cause had existed from eternity past and it was sufficient for the creation of the universe, then its effect must likewise have existed from eternity past, namely the universe, and the universe would already have died out by now. And so the implications of this argument are as follows. We cannot appeal to pre-existing eternal space and laws of science to explain the origin of the universe in the Big Bang. If this pre-existing space and these laws of science that had been there for eternity past were a sufficient explanation for the Big Bang, I'm kind of reiterating what I said, but that's probably helpful, then the Big Bang would have occurred and the universe would have already died its heat death in eternity past, because the sufficient conditions for the origin of the universe were always there. But I'm partly reading and partly trying to express it as clearly as I can. When a sufficient cause exists, a sufficient mechanistic, mechanical cause exists, its effects must also exist, in this case, the Big Bang. The only way to get around this problem is if the cause of the Big Bang, and this is Craig's argument, if the cause of the Big Bang is personal, so that it can decide to bring about a new effect when it doesn't have to. It's not mechanically caused, but it freely makes a decision to bring about a new effect, a change, namely the Big Bang. Now here is where, if you're listening carefully, I think, knowing what Bill believes about the origin of the universe, here is where some eyebrows may be raised, and I think rightly so. There is a problem here now. The idea of change, or a new effect, that is, a state of affairs different from the previous state of affairs, supposes time, where some properties existed at T1 and now different properties exist at T2 or T3 or T4, etc. So at some point in time, a personal agent, unlike a mechanical agent, can bring about a change from the way that things were at a previous time. That's what's being envisioned here. Now that's a decent argument against the view that there was an eternal span of time prior to the Big Bang, and then the Big Bang occurred as a result of natural mechanical forces. But the Big Bang is the beginning of time, on Dr. Craig's view, and this is now the orthodox view, and in spite of the occasional, I think, sensational-sounding suggestion to the contrary, this is the orthodox consensus of scientists. The eminent cosmologist Alexander Vilenkin explains his view that before our universe there was nothing at all, not even time itself. Referring to the creation of the universe in the Big Bang, Vilenkin says, "Time begins at the moment of creation, putting to rest the potentially endless questions about what happened before that." So, how then is the Islamic principle of determination supposed to help us? The existence, rather than the non-existence of the universe, is the only state of affairs that has ever obtained, since when considering what has ever been, we are scouring the passage of time to see if and when things exist. There was never a change from one state of affairs that had been at T1 with no universe, and a new state of affairs, namely a later point, the Big Bang and the beginning of the universe at T2, 3, 4, or 5, or any later time. So the change cannot require us to appeal to personal agency, because there was no change. Now, Craig employs two other arguments for the personal nature of the cause of the Big Bang, one employing Swinburne's differentiation of types of causes, and one from a taxonomy of the types of immaterial, uncaused, timeless things that can exist, and which could exhibit causal powers of the relevant sort. But it's this argument, the argument from determination, that he uses most often in public debate, because it is, I think, the easiest to grasp. So while the principle of determination does have some role to play in discussions about the origin of the universe, and it can be employed against the notion that eternal space and laws of science gave rise to the Big Bang, that's not possible, as explained earlier, because if the mechanistic sufficient conditions had always existed, then the universe would have been born and died out a long time ago, in eternity past. So yes, this principle of determination does have a role to play, but I'm currently at a roadblock seeing how this principle helps us to establish that the Big Bang had a personal cause. There may be other reasons for thinking so, but this one? Now look, God is personal. There are some arguments for this that are unrelated to the beginning of the universe, and they're, I think, decent arguments. I think the moral argument, as well as historical arguments about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, support the contention that God both exists and is personal in nature. So too, I think, does the testimony of innumerable believers, among whom I count myself, to the personal experience of God that they've had. But this argument about the principle of determination, not so much. Now look, I'm not infallible. I'm not a better philosopher than Dr. Craig, let alone the greatest philosopher in the world. So viewers are very welcome to step forward and give Dr. Craig's argument a helping hand, or perhaps give me a helping hand in understanding it better. But I'm trying, and just now, it doesn't look to me as though it works. What do you think?